You really can't get away from it. Every day when you turn on the news, when you talk with your friends, when you get on social media, it feels like everyone is pressing you to think what they think. But it's time to settle down and ask what you think. We want to help. Imagine for a minute that you have agreed to participate in a research study. You answered an ad in the newspaper. You're going to earn a few bucks for doing this. So you show up at the place where the research is supposed to be conducted, and you find that there is Stanley Milgram. He's the researcher. He's wearing a white lab coat, and he really does look the part of a researcher. He tells you that your role in the experiment is going to be decided by drawing straws. So by drawing straws, you land the role of teacher. Another guy who also answered an ad to participate shows up and he draws the other straw, and he becomes the learner in this experiment that you guys are both agreeing to participate in. Then things start to get interesting. You help strap the other guy in a chair, and you help connect electrodes to his body. He doesn't resist. Of course, he's been paid a few bucks just as you were. The wires lead to the other side of the wall. So you follow the researcher to the other side of the wall, and you sit down in front of a great big contraption with 30 different switches that are labeled from left to right in 15-volt increments ranging from 15 volts to 450 volts. Labels on the contraption identify the switches from 75 to 120 volts as moderate, then from 135 volts to 180 volts as strong. From 375 to 420 volts they're marked danger, severe shock. And the last two switches from 435 volts to 450 are marked XXX in big X's. The researcher tells you that you're supposed to teach word associations to the guy with the electrodes who's strapped to the chair on the other side of the wall. Every time that guy fails to give a correct answer, you administer a shock. You start at the lowest level and you bump it up one level every time he misses one. It turns out that the guy isn't such a great student. He keeps missing them. As you administer the shocks, he doesn't much like the moderate jolts. He says, ouch. Then you move on to the higher levels, and the guy's screaming out in pain. So you look to the researcher, and he says, please continue. So you bump it up, and the guy strapped to the chair screams out even louder. And you look at the guy in the white coat who paid you to participate in this thing, and he says, please go on. At the next level, you start to doubt that this guy can take much more of this, but the big shot running the show says, it is absolutely essential that you continue. So you go to the next level, and the guy in the chair doesn't make a sound. It's like he's passed out or something. You ask the next question, and the guy doesn't respond at all. So that's a miss. You're supposed to hit the next switch, but you look to the researcher, and he just says, you have no other choice, you must go on. You hit the last switch, and you get nothing but silence. By now you're sweating bullets, and you're feeling awful. You're wondering what you just did. So you put your face in your shaking hands, and you shake your head too, and then you hear the chair on the other side of the wall scoot on the floor. You hear some footsteps, and you look up, and the guy who had been strapped to the chair is standing there with a smile on his face. He's fine. You struggle to make sense of it all until the guy in the white coat explains that this was not a study about memory and learning. It was a study about obedience, to see just how far a person would go to follow the directions of an authority figure. The game was fixed to make you the teacher. When you drew straws, it was rigged so that you'd become the teacher. The machine in front of you doesn't really put out any electric shocks. The guy on the other side of the wall was just acting. Now I hope that by telling this to you in the form that I did, from the point of view of the teacher, has helped you to kind of experience, at least a little vicariously, what it would be like for the 40-some people who actually participated in this study when Stanley Milgram conducted this. You might be saying, well, I know that I wouldn't have done that, and I hope you're right, and I won't argue with you. But in fact, about 65% of those 40 people flipped all of the switches. Milgram conducted his research in the early 60s, after the last of the Nazi leadership were being sentenced to death or being put to death. They had been explaining that they weren't guilty of any wrong. They were just following orders when they conducted what we now call the Holocaust. And so the times have changed, but the nature of man has not. We've had a lot of examples. The My Lai massacre, the genocide in Rwanda, and a lot of other incidents. So it's still relevant to ask ourselves, what would we do? And we can answer that by asking, what do we do? If you can begin by identifying some authority figures in your life, maybe it'll help. Maybe your authority figure wears robes and carries a Bible. Or maybe he or she is a political figure, or maybe a news commentator, or possibly even some celebrity. Maybe that's the head of a group that you love very much and whose purpose you really do admire. The point here is not that you ought to abandon all associations with others or groups or to rebel against responsible leadership in all of its forms. The point is that becoming just a little more aware of your human tendency, the one that Milgram showed us, the tendency that history reveals to us, you can choose to resist drinking the Kool-Aid. And you really can choose instead to ask reasonable questions, even in the privacy of your own mind, and to take responsible actions that you might otherwise not take before you were aware that authority figures might be influencing you more than your own ability to reason. Now, for my own part, I'm aware that I believe all sorts of things that are also believed by authority figures. But the point is, I want to avoid believing things because some authority figure believes it or proclaims it. When we've examined the same facts for ourselves, and they have examined those facts, it's reasonable that most of the time, rational people will arrive at the same conclusions. That's not the point. It makes sense that we share the conclusions of authority figures in that sense. But reasonable people get to those conclusions through reasoning, through the same evidence, and not by just yielding to authority figures. Well, I hope this episode has helped. Please be sure to leave your comments and your questions below. Share this with your friends. Check out the next video in this series when it comes out. Next, we're going to look at even more influences that shape our thinking that have no basis in logic or careful thinking. It's true that once you identify and understand them, they really do lose all power over you. So be sure to subscribe and stick around.